There are at least 4 ways of understanding that. The first, if time Israel makes an appearance, is Jacob after his encounter with the living God. And those encounters, traditionally in ancient Near East times, an encounter with the living God would either kill you, or you would be sent forward, chastened, or sent on a mission. And in a sense, Israel has a meaning underneath that God turned. So Jacob was turned and is given the new name by God, Israel. What comes next is, you will love our God. So you have a first person plural. So in a sense, we are being spoken to as a collective. But then the you shall love your Lord your God, those are all singulars. So that's one way of looking at Israel, that Israel are collectives of individuals who have encountered the living God. So in a sense, all of us here individually and all of us here collectively are Israel. But as last week at Pentecost's reading shows, the idea of nation is clarified by the Holy Spirit. Because the Holy Spirit speaks to the nations. The Greek word in the Pentecost reading from the book of Acts is ethnos, from which we get ethnicity. Now, there's a lot of shenanigans that go on with the word ethnicity. There's a lot of shenanigans that go on with nationalism. But in the Bible, nations are language groups. They are historical archives. They are ideals that the historical archive of a language group preserves through time for the wisdom that it imparts to our children and newcomers. That, to me, is what a nation is in the Bible. That, to me, is clear behind the Greek word of ethnos and ethnicity. So as you go into the world, hearing people talk about ethnicity, and you hear about nations and nationalism, there's a biblical way of looking at this. Now, by the time of Charlemagne, actually in the Bible, you will also encounter Israel as being the children of Jacob, so there's a kinship structure behind it. And then it becomes family, and there's a blood structure to nation that kind of comes in. So when you read the Old Testament, you will have some tension. So you should always ask yourself what's going on behind Israel when you read it in the Old Testament. And when you hear ethnicity in the world today, are they talking about blood? Are they talking about a shared ideal mediated by language? Or are they talking about how Shakespeare would talk about Burgundy or England, and he was personifying the nation state in the ruler, that's the sovereign. And the fourth way, of course, is the traditional way, or the more modern way, that a nation is a territorial entity, and that territorial entity is justified by the security it brings and or its expansionary tendencies. So those are at least 4 ways of understanding nation. But I'm telling you what Shema Israel is getting at is us as having encountered God and are changed by it and are going to be shaped by it. That's the first question. The second question is, etc. You will love the Lord your God, actually our God, with all your heart, your soul, and with all your heart, with all your strength, and with all your soul. Love, I'm not going to spend a lot of time justifying this, but love in the Bible is charitable service. The Greeks had the word agape for that, and they distinguished it from eros by context. So this is not desiring God necessarily, though you can desire God. But to ahav, to love the Lord, is to charitably serve God. Serve God charitably. You're going to do that first off, and heart gets repeated twice in the Shema. So it's the center, it's the defining ground of an anthropological human metaphysics of the whole person. We hear the word all 3 times, and we hear heart twice. Heart is the seat of intention. Your intentionality starts your existence in God. And the Shema then follows it with all your nefesh, which we translate often as soul. But the soul for Israelites, it was in the throat, it was mediated by the breath. So to me, it's the soul's expression. And it's not just ethics, it's aesthetics. And then all your might, all your moed, again, all, it's your craft, it's your effort, it's your technology, it's your technique. So your whole person, your allness, your shalom that brings in progress is part of this unified understanding of the metaphysical human person. This is embodied in the first 2 lines of the Shema. And then we move on to the house. You know, the translation we read was, you will recite them in your home. But the word is bite, and I think that would have been better translated as house. Though contextually it's justifiable to say it's a home. But this is how you build a legacy, a house. When we talk about the house of David, we talk about the house of Abraham, we're talking about a legacy. And it's not just blood mediated, because Israel, when it fled Egypt, brought non-blood kin out of Israel with it. So it was people who spoke and adapted to and accepted the ideals representative of God in the Hebrew language. So again, this is building a legacy and a welcomeness and a systemic welcome of doors to strangers, not related necessarily by blood, but by ideals. And the Shema is the ideal. So you're going to, and then you recite them, Divrei Tavam, to your children, which are newcomers as well as our privileged blood. And we are sharing with them our linguistic archive. So again, because we have agreed to the linguistic archive of the Hebrews in the Old Testament, we are ethnic Israel. Not the way people think of ethnicity as having to do with some sort of blood or some sort of ceremonial rite of passage. It's because the ideals in the Hebrew scriptures, in the Hebrew language group, becomes part of our ideals as Christians. And we're going to speak them to our children, we're going to speak them in our houses, and we build our houses that way. And we speak the Shema when we get up in the morning and we go down, when we lie down at night. It becomes our encompassing guide to how we are to be as humans. You bind them as a sign on the hand, which is your technique, and as an emblem on your forehead. These are subsidiary to the heart. The heart has already opens it up and it's repeated again. And now we move to the forehead and the hand. These guide your hand, these guide your thinking, but the center again is in your heart and in your expressive soul. You're going to write these words on the gates of your house, the mezuzah, and on your gates. And this is not just about a mezuzah on your gate. This is how we construct systems, right? You write, the way we construct systems have doors and it has gates. And we better hope that those we gate and wall off from really has some more meaning than our biases and our prejudices. It's not just a simple scrupulosity. This is how we design systems, from this metaphysical shalom and wholeness. And when we are whole and fully integrated within the Shema structure, we don't exclude, we become virtuous. We realize that the way we move through the world is redeeming every present moment from virtue, not necessarily having an ego-driven plan, but redeeming each moment from virtue that calms, pacifies, and welcomes. We need to design our systems, too, if we're going to be on the side of the anthropological wholeness, which is our only way to bring in the peace that God promises. Uktav tam, you will write them, is the translation, but actually the root is cut. And that's how you engraved absolutes and essential truths in that time period. You would actually etch into clay tablets writings that were meant to endure. And so if you think back to the Decalogue, the Ten Commandments, make no graven images, but you can make graven speech, graven expression. And I think behind that, again, is what endures is the soul that we express, the soul that we give breath to. That endures, we can etch them, we can engrave them, but images mislead us because we then think that the images that we celebrate and we commemorate and we lift up and we build gates around, we think those images and those forms are what endure and thereby reveal something about God's preference. And this is the real mistake, I think, of so many, is that I think this is Plato's error that continually crops up in our society, that somehow the God is revealed in formal permanence rather than the intentionality and the grace and the activity and the expression that is pacified. And instead we build these gates and we worship and celebrate these forms, and we think as long as our shrines and our churches and our bodies endure, we have God's approval. And I think that's the great achievement of the ongoing Protestant Reformation, is we are not form-driven. In fact, we are deinstitutionalizers of forms. We are deinstitutionalizers of institutions. We pay attention to words. Words are important. Now, I mentioned Charlemagne. I want to skip ahead now. You had the church having this anthropology, but they also had a real sense of form and blood relations. Now, by the time of Descartes re-Platonizes intellectual thought in Europe, because we move from the heart being the center of existence and our expression to the mind. Cogito ergo sum, I think, therefore I am. My existence is based in my mind. And in the search for ideals and absolutes, which humans are always looking for authority as well as for community building, rationality becomes defined by geometry. That's where we get ratios, right? You're looking for formal permanence, and mathematics was purported to have that. Then the next step is real key here. Once you move into geometric forms, you then start breaking those forms apart and categorizing them. That becomes rationality. You take a whole and you break them into parts. Categorical logic follows. Let's move forward to now Kant. Kant sits down, and he never left his hometown. The great exploration of his world was going for afternoon walks with a servant behind him carrying an umbrella. He had a rival who I'm writing a book on named Johann Gottfried Herder. He's the hero here. He was a minister. This is the late 18th century in German idealism. He was a student of Kant, then a friend, and a rival. They're looking for ideals because they want to disestablish the churches and the tradition's voice on these topics. But back then, philosophy and theology and religion were a lot closer to each other. The key debate was whether or not Kant, sitting in his armchair, could discover absolutes in his mind by the operation of his mind, unmediated by language. And Herder thought this was a complete travesty. He called them shadows. And then Kant was actually much more vicious to Herder and said, oh, he's just playing around with poetry, etc. And so that's why, in a sense, Kant won, and indeed Kant did win. And that's why philosophical books now are unreadable, because there's a distrust of what Kant called the a prioris of language, the baggage of tradition and the history of a language group that carries forth in our language. And Wittgenstein, for example, get rid of all that baggage of the language so we can speak a pure form, pure language. By the 1850s, you have categories taking shape. And if you think about it, Frankenstein by Mary Shelley is an allegory of this. You take a whole, you rip it apart, which kills it, and then you take these dead parts, you put them together, and you create a new whole. That's our great achievement, but it turns out to be a monster. This is where we are now. This is the meta-crisis we are in. We have elevated not the heart and the intent, but the internal operation of our recategorization and our creation of new holes instead of the holes that we find in nature and neighborhood. We have crisis after crisis after crisis, and now we're going to try, and in these categories, it's very easy to create dichotomies. Us, them, black, white, etc. And then those become binaries. And then we can code them and turn them over to machines. And somehow what Kant called the crooked timber of humanity can be solved by machine logic, employing these categories with no heart, no sense organs. Now, again, I said Heidegger was disestablished by the 1850s because philosophy, again, wanted to get away from tradition. They wanted to get away from the call of the heart. They wanted to prioritize the mind. And they certainly didn't want to be told that anything impinged on radical freedom, which is really where Kant begins. He doesn't begin with the heart, he begins with his search for self-definition in complete freedom. And Heidegger has since been demonized as his thinking about history of nations as language groups. He's now been tied on the path to Hitler. Because by the time of the early 20th century, this categorical thinking has created an idea of a nation being blood and soil Aryans. And it is we hear about blood libels. It's a heart libel to say that Heidegger participated in that. That was a degradation of a different form of intellect than what Heidegger was approaching. He was a Christian. He, like all the philosophers, are looking for ideals and absolutes for humanity. And for Heidegger, it was definitely Christ. But in the rush to get rid of all religion, all tradition, all a prioris that somehow they're limited our freedom and actually imposed an obligation on us to love our neighbors and serve them through the Golden Rule. In the rush to get rid of them, they throw out Heidegger. Even though Heidegger's method established anthropology, psychology, comparative religion, and is the foundation of the way we Presbyterians read the Bible, which is historical context. He is the solution that we're looking for. It is not Kant. It is not Kantian logic that is coded in the machines. Good luck with that. That's not going to straighten that crooked timber of egotistical self-interest that gets us into paradox after paradox that somehow or other we have to live with. We have to live with an ironical detachment to get through the world. Unintended consequences. So much so now that people don't even trust language anymore because it's all self-interest. And so we're seeing this revisitation of the cult of the body. Read Naomi Klein's doppelganger. People don't trust language anymore. In fact, language is so abused. We have something called blue lies where they're so outrageously wrong that all they are meant to do is build tribal alliances because even though I know you're lying, I'm on your side, so my mere acceptance of your lie means I'm on your side. That's how this categorical thinking, this categorical coding, the propaganda, the conspiracies, it's this meta-crisis where we have disestablished the heart. God the Father is not the God of meta-crisis. And it's not the Father of meta-crisis. It's humanity. Always is humanity. Humanity crucified Jesus. Humanity is the Father of meta-crisis. God is not creating this meta-crisis for some eschatological crutch and catastrophe at the end where everything is sorted out. I am absolutely certain, and there's dark clouds, there's going to be problems. Every generation has to learn these. You have generational ascents and descents, but there is progress if you know how to look for it. This is not sin progressing, this is Christ progressing in this world. But every generation needs to learn it. And every generation needs to move beyond this, the quick fixes of body and machines to get us to where we want to go. So I talk about the soul. It's not just ethics, it's aesthetics. You can see a hegemonic intent in certain art, and you can see counter-hegemonic liberation intents and aesthetics in art. All of this flows from the Shema, and the Shema becomes the foundation of human, anthropological, and metaphysical wholeness with the heart at its center. That's where we're going to repair when we recover a loving, charitable heart, beginning our work there, and then the rest of our efforts and our wholeness and our pursuits become centered in that golden rule, which slips off the tongue too easily, the golden imperative of seeing people in need, empathizing because you've gone through it yourself, and taking steps to remediate and solve it. That's the solution to this meta-crisis. It begins in the heart. It does not begin with a mind that, oh, I just want to step over that guy in the street to get to where I'm going and my service for the God as I understand it. I have more to say, but I'm going to move real quickly, that the Shema is a call to progress. It's a call to wholeness. That's the only way we're going to get to the shalom we want. It is the a priori, but it's a different a priori. And it's an a priori that we can accept and adopt and live and embody. It models a life where the heart guides the mind to work for peace, and we design our systems, doors, primary, and what is exited is the detritus of that crooked timber of humanity up here, which history is littered with. The second point I want to make is that Herder's brilliance is that we are always searching for absolutes, and yet we hear a lot now that there are no absolutes, there are no universals, there are some unbridgeable, incommensurable differences between peoples, between languages. Herder's brilliance was that you go into all language group archives, arts, poetry, and you look for the manifestations of the ideals. And Christian missionaries have found that Christ has preceded the Christian missionaries in these cultures. This is the comparative ideal, the comparative science of Herder. The ideal is out there, the absolute is out there. Herder recognizes it. The ideal for humanity's wholeness is Christ. That's the question that is posed to us, and Psalm 96 concludes that that's how we're going to be evaluated for our righteousness, is whether or not we accept that the ideal and the absolutes that we are seeking for to build a community is based on the ideal of Christ, not the ideal of some Frankenstein system. And the third is what I call the attendance to grace. It's integrating our perception of our own experience of providence and grace and love and reflecting it outwards. We attend. We attend by receiving it, and we attend by serving it. Again, charitable love, charitable service. We do that by virtue. Virtues that calm. Virtues that are patient. Virtues that are peace-bringing, living, creative, active, vibrant, flourishing, insightful, sharing, patient, kind, and steadfastly caring, that builds a civilization of care, not a civilization of competition. And here is the Trinitarian essence. This is why Jesus is God. Jesus is wholly committed to the heart centrality to sustain and repair the creation as God has delivered it to his life and to our life. We are committed to the street corners. We are committed to the wildlands. We are committed to the neighbors. That's what makes Jesus God. His entire life was given over in sacrificial service. That's the Trinitarian essence, which is attendance to grace, the charitable service. And that charitable service is guided by the obligation of the golden rule. And don't let him tell you that all religions are the same. All religions have, do not do unto others that you find hateful or you don't want them to do to you. Only Christianity has the positive obligation to be positive and active, do for others what you would have them do for you. It's not negative and entertaining, it's active and outreaching. Christianity only has that ethic. Don't let him tell you all religions are the same. So let's attend to grace. Let's dispense providence as we found it and give it outwards, opening our tables, our love, our charity to others. let us understand and recognize the Shema as the door to Christ, a door that has no gate. May it be so for you and me. Amen.
I really do enjoy that you have this time now to reflect and converse about what you, I kind of dropped a lot on you. So I'm not sure how to necessarily moderate this, but I'd love for you all to take the lead on how this goes.
Well, first, let me say, wow. And secondly, to say, appreciate the importance of the heart over the mind. And thirdly, to love the Lord your God with your heart, your mind, your soul, and all your strength. Write it on your heart. Write it on your hand. Write it on your forehead. It just strikes me that our faith is to be all-encompassing. It is to be the very thing, the singular thing that drives us forward to share God's love, which is sacrificial service. Thank you so much.
If I may make a comment, because I did not get to it in my sermon. In Matthew 22, Jesus says, love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. So the mind does come in the New Testament. That's why I call the Shema a door. And the Greek word is dianoia, which our Bibles call mind. I think a better would have been understanding or wisdom or penetrating insight based on experience. That's dianoia. I've also seen it translated as discernment. I get very suspicious because people talk about their spiritual gift of discernment and they slip into categorization of others based on binaries. So I don't think Jesus is saying, love the Lord your God with all your discernment. It is with your penetrating understanding of what's going on. So the mind does come in, but again, the Shema is the entry door into this anthropological wholeness. Then the mind comes in. Not inverted, where the mind starts. Thanks, Ron.
Yeah, well, again, what you said, a couple of things pulled for me with the connection to music. I feel like so many times music is the language of the heart. When we are singing with words, we're combining the cerebral with the feeling. And then there are messages that come through in certain... when you were saying about charitable service, I kept thinking of the Ubi Caritas chant. Ubi Caritas et amor, Ubi Caritas Deus ibi est, which means where love and caring are, there God is. So that one just, and then to sing that is to remind us of this. And the last one was the, I had to look it up because I couldn't remember the lyrics. It's God be in my head.
And in my understanding.
And in my understanding, God be in my, here it is, mine eyes, and in my looking, God be in my mouth, and in my speaking, God be in my heart, and in my loving. And it's when you sing these things, it takes that message and it draws it into wholeness, as you just said.
Well, I wanted to say, when you started talking about how words they have no soul, and I love the Frankenstein analogy, like you can put all the parts together, but if there's no heart, and it made me start thinking about AI and how we're using AI today, and the way that machines learn to produce AI is by reading writers. So they feed books by tons and tons and tons of writers into the machines. They learn the inflections, they learn the words, they learn the usage, but they're learning from what's already flawed, which is just the words. And so it just makes me wonder where we're all headed, that's all.
Yeah, they're stuck in the past. This machine learning is going to privilege who has published the most, right? There's privilege in there. And it's also stuck in the past, so it's recognizing recurrent patterns. There's no progress. When we have genius bringing back Christ to every generation and every language group, AI is not going to pick it up. It's going to be idiosyncratic and there's going to be noise. There is no progress in AI. There may be some efficiencies in production, but there's no moral progress. There's no aesthetic progress, potentially. There's no golden rule. That's what's going to heal us. We are not going to go down the tubes, people. We aren't. It's the golden rule that is going to heal us, and I'm convinced it's going to be the reforming principle of Christianity of which we are socially